A congressional panel which is investigating the deadly 6th of January attack on the US Capitol last year held its very first primetime televised hearing. The panel laid out its case that the former President Donald Trump had engineered an attempted coup to remain in power, and his claims of a stolen election are in fact at the heart of this assault. Now, the panel also aired never-before-seen footage for the very first time on primetime television. It also laid off the events of the 6th of January in a chronological order, starting in the morning before the Capitol was actually breached by this mass of people.
We're about 5 miles out.
Now, the clips also show the rioters breaking windows and pushing through the barricades. The officers can be heard shouting to hold the line as they physically clashed with the rioters. Some people are specifically identified as members of the Proud Boys, but the caption that is written on their shirts and in some of the other paraphernalia that they carry.
I need support.
Remember, Proud Boys is a white supremacist group that supported Donald Trump, and earlier this week the Proud Boys leader and 4 lieutenants were charged with seditious conspiracy. Now, the panel actually aims to prove that the violence was in fact part of a broader drive by the former President Donald Trump and his inner circle to illegitimately cling on to power. 5 more hearings over the coming weeks are scheduled to be held. The Democrat-led committee will attempt to reverse the Republican efforts to downplay or to deny the violence of the attack, especially in the light of what happened on the 6th of January. All right, now to give us more insights in terms of what this panel is likely to be looking at and how soon will it be able to reach its conclusions, we are joined in by our correspondent Benji Hai, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C. Now, Benji, the panel is, of course, looking at the events that transpired on the 6th of January back in the year 2020. Now, this is, of course, going to be a very crucial look in terms of the violence that took place at Capitol Hill. What are we expecting that the panel will in fact be looking at?
Well, we don't have to expect anything. In fact, they've already held 2 hours of televised hearings that millions of Americans have tuned into during prime time here in the States. And about 17 months after the worst violence that has been seen at the US Capitol, inside the very building where that took place, the House committee investigating that assault laid out its initial findings, its initial assessment, and they pinned the blame directly on Donald Trump for inciting that violence and with his overt attempt to try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power to the rightful winner of that election, Joe Biden. To do that, they formed a carefully crafted presentation and relied on testimony from filmmakers who were on the scene, from police officers who suffered injuries, and even used the words of Donald Trump's inner circle and closest supporters who admitted that Donald Trump had lost the election and also said that he had specifically, personally asked them to be there. Again, it's a concerted effort here by Democrats, but also some Republicans who find themselves against Donald Trump, attempting to piece together a narrative that he is the one responsible for those devastating and haunting scenes that we saw. Unsurprisingly, the former president has branded this whole process as a disgrace, and really, as this is just the first of several hearings to come, the challenge remains for the Democrats to try to convince vast swathes of the country who either don't want to pay attention to events of the past or perhaps genuinely believe that Donald Trump had the election stolen from him, persuade those people that this was a real threat to their democracy and a threat that is continuing forward. The fear for the Democrats is that running out of time. Ultimately, with the midterm elections coming up in November, there's a chance they will lose both chambers of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. And ultimately, that will leave them in a situation where the progress that have been made, these hearings, any reports to come, will be immediately halted by the Republicans. What was happened tonight was a clear example of partisanship in action. On the one side, you have lawmakers, you have vast swathes of the population who are adamant, outraged by the events of that day. On the other half, you have a population, supporters, lawmakers in denial that Donald Trump lost the election and determined to prevent any sort of further probing into that assault on January 6th.
Absolutely indeed. Now, what has Donald Trump got to say about this House committee investigation that is looking into the 6th of January riots?
As I mentioned, the words from him, rather predictable, unsurprising. He's called it a witch hunt. He's called it, as I said before, a disgrace. And that certainly is a sentiment that's expressed largely by a lot of the Republican Party. But I think one important point to make that I also addressed before, which is that as part of the testimonies that featured in this initial hearing, we heard directly from his former colleagues, from family members, his daughter Ivanka Trump, also her husband Jared Kushner, who explicitly recognised that he had lost that election and were shocked by the developments of that day. Why they should be so shocked is a little bit more difficult to work out, given that also what we heard at that testimony, again, was the language used by Donald Trump earlier that day, talking about how it was essential that people took action and showed strength, not weakness, in order to protect America. And therefore, people watching had pieced together, or at least the Democrats are hoping that people had pieced together, Donald Trump's language and the actions that followed.
Absolutely indeed, Benji. But the big task in front of this committee that is looking into this investigation remains to draw the link between the violence that unfolded on the 6th of January to what Donald Trump may or may not have said that resulted in the people storming the Capitol. Now, Donald Trump, in his defense, would say that he wanted the people to be there for them to witness that the election was being stolen from him. But he would say that he did not instigate the mob to storm the Capitol. How does the committee intend to actually draw that link so that accountability can be fixed on Donald Trump?
Well, the committee was very careful in their approach to this. They were trying not to associate Donald Trump supporters at large with the action, I guess, so that they avoided being branded as calling those supporters naive or any sort of similar term. They particularly pointed out specific far-right groups, for instance, the Proud Boys, who were present that day as well, and they isolated them and showed that they had looked around the Capitol site beforehand, clearly had some sort of premeditated idea as to what they wanted to happen, and made the argument that those particular groups were inspired by Donald Trump's language, and it wasn't something that just happened organically on the day, that this was a particular concerted, coordinated effort to try to subvert democracy. As you well note, Donald Trump and his supporters may very well decide that that is not their opinion. That is not the case. Again, it comes back to our argument about America being divided. But ultimately, the case that was put forward by Democrats, and as I say, the two Republicans on that panel as well, is that Donald Trump's language that day and in weeks prior directly incited the violence that we saw that was acted out by thousands of people on site, but more specifically those far-right groups, including Proud Boys, who had sort of done a reconnaissance of that area shortly before, having not even attended Donald Trump's rally. And so it's been weeks and months, the Democrats argue, of Donald Trump building up this rhetoric about the election being stolen from him, that then was taken by those groups and put into force.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Benji Haya, for joining us from Washington, D.C. and getting us all those insights there. This, of course, is a big story that we will continue to track on WION. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.